Hey guys, before we dive into the show, I wanted to tell you about the perfect trailer cue blueprint, which is 100% free and you can download it right now over at thetrailermusicschool.com/blueprint. Now, this blueprint will help you to completely understand the structure of trailer music, how to build tracks that will be more licensable and have more impact and capture the right people's attention. So whenever you start writing a cue, make sure you've got this blueprint to hand and you can use it to help speed up your process, feel more confident that you've crafted a well-structured trailer cue before you send it off to that publisher or editor or supervisor. Okay, let's get into the episode.
One man, one microphone, and one medium-sized coffee. Welcome to the Trailer Music Composers Podcast.
Hey guys, and welcome to another episode of the Trailer Music Composers Podcast. Now, this is pretty exciting for two reasons. This episode is about my experience of recording at Abbey Road Studios, recording a string section, a brass section. And also, this episode is sponsored, which I'm very excited about. Very excited. Now, the sponsor is Emma Middleton. So those keen listeners in the audience will know that I had Emma on the podcast twice recently. Emma as a music supervisor and Emma as a producer-composer combo with Kieran Scragg. Now, Emma is launching her own awesome trailer music library and is on the lookout for some talent. So before I kind of give the gist away, I'll just pass the mic over to Emma. She's not really here. It's a pre-recorded message, but it sounds cool, doesn't it?
Hi, Rich. It's such a pleasure being on your podcast recently. Just wanted to pop back with a quick message for your lovely composer fan base. I'm actually on the lookout for experienced trailer composers, as well as producers and vocalists who are up for collaborating with trailer composers. The reason is I'm setting up my own trailer label over the course of this year with a few albums already in production. So I would love to hear from people if this is up your street. I've given the details to Rich to put in the description of the podcast. So if you use that email heading and address, get in touch. I'll get back to you as soon as I can. There is just one prerequisite, is that I am looking for independent writers only at this stage. So obviously if you're in an exclusive publishing agreement, we can't work together at this point. But yeah, that's it. Thank you. Thanks, Rich, for giving me a little window of time to get this message out there. Can't wait to hear from anyone who might be interested. Thank you. Bye.
Just a little reminder, guys, I'll be putting all of the details of that in the description below. So, on to the show. Hey guys, here I am waiting at the train station to get into London. Classic, taxi cancelled last minute, and of course the train is delayed, so I'm a little bit nervous. Mostly because I like to get to the studio early and meet the conductor, meet the engineers, kind of get myself settled in for the day. But I'm sure it will be fine. What's running through my head is kind of basically just like excitement. I know what I'm going to be... I've done this before. I know what I'm going to be seeing. Orchestra is playing through my parts. Well, that sounds awful. Playing through my music. And me sitting there with the score, following along. And if I think they could play a part differently or more in line with what I intended, then I just say, hey, can we try that again? It's going to be awesome. I'm particularly looking forward to the brass, because I've only ever recorded brass a couple of times before. And as not a brass player, it's exciting to see, Admittedly, I'm not a string player either. I have played the violin and the cello, so I have an idea of it, a little bit more than I do a brass instrument. As you know, with one of the Throat albums, I recorded myself recording trombone, and it didn't quite sound as awesome as I had hoped. So I'm sure these guys at Abbey Road Studios will be immense. Definitely like a million times better than I could have been. So I'll keep you posted. Okay, well, here I am, just got off at Maida Vale station, walking up the hill towards Abbey Road. Now, I had kind of a funny thought about this. It's like, I did a video about this a while ago, like this kind of weird anxiety created by wanting to capture everything. It's like, I want to talk to you as if you're here with me, so I can kind of talk you through my brain's whirring. I also want to take photos so I can share those and do videos and write a book. It's just too much. And it's really funny. And I talked about this in this video I did, where it's like I have this kind of like rose-tinted view of doing this type of thing. I think it's so sort of caught up in me trying to capture it that I forget to live it and breathe it. So I figured, okay, calm down, Rich. Just walk and talk. So that's what I'm going to do. I was thinking I was going to do a video about it and just get too panicked. So, yeah, I'll probably do a video of the orchestra playing because, you know, that's cool. But yeah, so the stars aligned. I've arrived with good time. You know, although the train was late, it was still fine. Thanks to my wife, Debs, for dropping me off at the station. Anyway, so my track is second on the lineup, so the show starts in about 20 minutes. And I'm just thinking, this is great fun. Like, one of the highlights of my career thus far is, actually, pretty much all of the highlights have been recording the live musicians, recording an orchestra, because that human element of your parts being played, you know, not only does it kind of feel wonderful and majestic and like, hey, I've kind of made it, it's also humans playing the parts that you give them bring life to it. As much as the samples we use are absolutely amazing and out of this world, and I still take them for granted, hearing live musicians play is such a thrill. Especially orchestral stuff, I think, because, you know, it's not somewhere where I've come from. You know, I came from bands, so seeing bands play, I'm like, yep, well done, everyone. Whereas this, I'm like, ooh, you know, I have played in an orchestra terribly, and it was great because I got to watch all the other musicians. But again, this feels new and exciting and fresh, and you know, we don't often have the time and or budget to do these things as composers, to work with live musicians, specifically work with a large group of them. So this is really exciting. I'm going to head down there, say hello to everybody, and I'll probably record another. Hopefully I'll remember to record one today to kind of talk you through what's happening. I'll probably record one when they're actually recording, because I kind of want to capture it as a podcast episode, because I love the podcast. What can I say? Anyway, guys, speak to you in a bit. Hey guys, so it's now been 6 days since we recorded at Abbey Road, and whilst I was there, I was kind of taking notes about the whole thing, you know, like trying to kind of sketch out a blog post for you that would obviously become this as well, little podcast episode, kind of about the kind of my main takeaways from recording at Abbey Road, which incidentally are the same takeaways I've had whenever I've recorded live, really. So just to round up first, that the whole thing was pretty cool, really, you know, rocking up to Abbey Road with all these people outside, and you can just walk straight in, and it's like, hey, yep, that's me. I'm recording Abbey Road. That's right. So it felt really cool, you know. And we obviously took photos of ourselves outside the studios, and the security would come out and stop any members of the public, which obviously, on one hand was a bit unfair, but on the other hand, totally understandable and cool. So we had a huge string section in the morning and a brass section in the afternoon. And it's just one of those things, like, so few things beat this, hearing your music being played by actual people, and especially when it's like you're talking about 30 or 40 people. And then when you look down and you're like, well, this is the room I've seen in the photos of the Beatles and photos with, Elton John, and there's just so much history there, which part of me is a bit like, meh, just a room, guys. The other part of me is like, whoa, there's something special here. So, I think that kind of sums up the whole experience, actually, how it's so surreal, because you've got this, on the one hand, kind of blown away by the historical importance of the place, and then on the other hand, it's just like, yep, it's a room with people in it, and I suppose you could do that with every single experience. But, anyway, so I was taking notes when it wasn't my tracks playing. In fact, I was taking notes when it was my tracks playing, because that's usually when the main ideas came in. I've kind of got 6 big takeaways for you. And I say for you, it's mostly for me, because I'm pretty sure I wrote these down last time I recorded with an orchestra and didn't follow through. So let's just talk about a couple of things. Hearing the string section play, before I dive into the 6 takeaways, hearing the string section play, hearing the brass play, it was just phenomenal. The brass were insanely loud. It was great. Such a, brassy, it's awesome. And the string section, fantastic. And the thing it highlighted with me with samples and live strings is how few string libraries have the attack of a live string section. They get the kind of lovely kind of singable legato patches that make it feel very natural, but they don't have the attack. And I know quite a few trailer composers layer other articulations onto their legatos. And I got to say, I'm going to start doing that more, because the attack of the string section was fantastic, especially on the more melodic movements, because sometimes when you do these long melodies with legato patches, they get a bit lazy and laggy, and it kind of slows the whole thing down. But having a bite on the first note was fantastic. So I think I'm going to start layering perhaps some marcato patches, or maybe even staccato patches at the front of all of my long articulations, just to really bring it in a little bit more. And I think that will also enable me to translate what I'm hearing in my Logic session into a live session. So here we go. The 6 takeaways. Takeaway 1, right? Put it simply, expression in the longs. It's one of those things. You play a long note with strings and you go, yeah, sounds great. Sounds like a long note. And then you add a bit of expression, a little swell, perhaps, or a slight fade out in the long notes, or, a small amount of expression. And the thing I noticed was the phrases that had more expression written into the parts really sung. They just absolutely soared. And they sounded so emotive and human, which ultimately is what we're all trying to achieve, really, is an emotive and human sound. So the note to myself is to work more expression into the long phrases, into the patches, into the melodies. And that goes for even just essentially kind of sus chords, not sus chords, into sustained chords. When it's just, it's act 2 or maybe even act 1, when I've got a long chord spanning over a bar, maybe more, going into a chord progression, write some expression in there. Just add, it doesn't have to be huge, but adding that expression will then translate in a live session so much more. I mean, it's really hard to explain, but it's kind of like the difference between playing, having your vocal go through a vocoder and having your vocal go through an actual singer. You go, oh wow, well, over a vocoder sounded amazing. The live singer's done all this wonderful expression to what I've written. So, I want to, going forward, pay more attention to my expression. And, that translates to my modulation as well. And also my automation in the volumes of my string patches. It kind of depends on what track I'm working on, but I usually get a bit lazy, with automation. If it's anything, it's sort of block. This section's going to be this level, then the next section's going to be the next level. But, maybe I should allow myself the time and the space and the energy to improve my attention to detail in the automation. I know some of you are listening like, yeah, Rich, hello, I already do that. And I'm like, yeah, I know. But the thing I've noticed is so much of what I do, I forget. Or I stop bothering to try, like mixing. I know the mixing stuff. I know how to mix a track. But when I'm writing, I go, I can't bother. You get the gist, and I think I started doing that a lot more. And I think that maybe that's to do with the fact that my output is so big. God, that sounds really gloaty, doesn't it? My output is massive. I generally go for quantity when it comes to tracks. I'm not saying what I've written isn't quality, but what I'm saying is my attention to detail lapses. So maybe that's the first one, attention to detail. So I've kind of given myself a New Year's resolution in June to focus more on the detail. And this doesn't just go for live albums, this goes for other albums too. Focus on the expression and the automation of individual sounds. Can you get them to sing more? So I talk about that a lot with signature sounds and things, automating EQs, automating the volume, so that, automating the wet, dry mix of reverbs so that you let this one sound feel like it's growing and moving. And I should be doing that with everything else. And I know the reason I don't is because I kind of sense this need to output a lot of music and ideas. So rather than going, I'm going to focus on the detail of this, I'm like, well, I've got the ideas out. So there, it's done. On to my second point. I've put, the note was playable short strings. Now, I'm pretty sure a lot of you are aware of this, but we write on a keyboard, or some of us write with a mouse, or some of us write with a drum pads, percussion pads. We write for one instrument to be played by another. So our voicings, that's the way our notes within our chord are arranged. Our voicings affect how they will be played on the instruments. So, this is kind of case in point, right? Recording Abbey Road Studio 2, best musicians in the world, and some of my short string parts they were struggling to play. And I say struggling to play, I don't mean they couldn't play them. I mean it took them more takes to master. They still got it. Obviously there was some splicing wizardry going on behalf of the Pro Tools technician. But I forget to think about the player and the playability. And how some of the parts we write for short strings are impossibly difficult. You know, I was kind of sat there thinking, how did anyone play Philip Glass's pieces? Because they're so machine-like and, you know, expansive and difficult to play. And actually, it was funny because the part that I was getting them to play was kind of like a Philip Glass chord progression. You know, it was just ascending arpeggios, but the movements were very close and fast, you know, and high. So, you know, perhaps, and that was that was when it was most difficult, when you gave them fast, close parts that were high up. Because obviously those of you who know stringed instruments will know that the intervals become smaller, which means the margin for error becomes bigger. So note to myself, when I write string parts, if I go to the very top register of the string parts, find a way to simplify them so that it's more playable. You know, and that's the thing. For me, whenever I've had long players, had string players playing, it's always the long strings, the lush sound that really like pulls at my heartstrings. It really tugs me into the whole thing. The short strings, you suddenly go, oh wow, I've made a part that's really difficult. and you know, I'm not being totally rude or anything like this, but kind of the samples sometimes sound better because what I'm trying to achieve isn't human playing. I'm trying to achieve basically synth-like arpeggiation. You know, pop, 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 you know, 100% quantized, 100% tuned. Whereas when I'm looking for that more kind of throat-like, percussive, human error aspect of it, where if they're a little out of time, a little out of tune, it's fine, then that's perfect. So, you know, I guess it's kind of addressing my intention behind the short string parts. If I want them to be machine-like and inhuman, then I have to consider that what will happen when I give those to real players, what's going to happen. You go up to the top end of the register, you know, the high C, it's going to be difficult for them to play arpeggios up there. So maybe simplify, Rich. So point 3, interesting textures. Now this is one of those things that it's I'm surprised at myself because interesting textures is one of the things that excites me the most. Interesting textures and timbres, i.e. creating movement and life with very little musical material, like one note. You know, whether that's exploring bowing patterns, whether that's exploring articulations, whether that's exploring harmonics, whether that's exploring different stimulus, i.e. something new triggering the sound. So, for instance, if you're playing the drums, what happens when you use a bouncy ball or a tennis ball or a metal hammer or a wooden mallet, those type of things. The timbres, basically. Because so often, again, this is attention to detail, so often with these kind of orchestral cues, I'll go, all right, bosh, harmonic, that's my first act. You know, because it does the job. It's got a certain amount of like, it's kind of like the ping and the boim. It does a lot of work without us having to do that work. So, you know, I'll play a harmonic and it'll be done. It'll be great. But then what happens if perhaps I give the string players some different direction to give it some movement and give it something, give it life? And maybe I could try and achieve that with my sample libraries too. So there's not just bosh, A harmonic, or, you know, C harmonic, the two keys I work in. Because those little details, again, the details really do make a huge difference when when you hear some players playing it, half of the orchestra could do the flat A, the other half could be doing trems. It's just those tiny details that really bring the simple things to life. And actually, that brings me on to point 4, which is do not underestimate simplicity. It's the thing I mean, I am actually often championing simplicity and allowing yourself to oversimplify your writing, especially melody writing. Because, you hear an orchestra play a simple piece and they do the heavy lifting. So you suddenly hear the beauty of the simplicity. It's just wonderful. It's like listening to Arvo Pärt. Any of his music, it's just insanely simple but beautiful. And it's the same when you give these parts to an orchestra. You give them a really simple part and you let them play that part. Firstly, because it's simple, it'll be easy, i.e. they'll nail it quickly, and then you'll spend less time in the studio, i.e. spend less money. But I want to emphasize something. When I was at university, remember, I didn't study composition, I didn't study orchestration officially. I had lessons with a independent composer outside of university. Once every couple of weeks, I'd go around and we'd talk about orchestration, and he played a lot of instruments, and I would write these lines that he would then play on these instruments, and it just astounded me how I could give him a single note that lasts 2 bars, and he'd play it with such a life. I'd be like, well, job done. I don't need to do anything to this. This is amazing. And that's the thing, the simplicity of it. It's like when I've gone to the proms at, I can't remember that, at the Royal Albert Hall. Amazing venue, incredible musicians, and they play, and then you'll get someone playing a solo piano piece by, I don't know, Liszt, or Rachmaninoff or Chopin, or there's specific ones I can't remember which ones it was, but I saw somebody play some incredibly fast, intricate solo piano stuff, and I just sat there and thought, okay, this is quite cool. It's kind of like seeing Yngwie Malmsteen, I guess, or Steve Vai. It's pretty cool that you can do this fast. In fact, it's amazing that you've reached that technical prowess. But emotionally, I disconnect. So I kind of sat back and I was like, yeah, okay, I'm done. And the same kind of carries through with your own writing. If you can use simplicity and the odd detail of technicality, it's amazing. Well, I mean, in practical terms, that means that you could have a very, very short, very simple pattern, but then at the end of an 8-bar loop, you throw in an intricate run. Again, it's that detail. It's that drop of detail in that C, and it's just. I feel very wistful. I guess that's the right word. It's a lovely sunny day in the Nacho Wood. Although there's no nachos because it's not autumn, so it's just dirt. Well, no, not dirt. Beech nuts, I think. Yeah, beech nuts. The nut wood. Anyway, I'm getting distracted. Look at the way you write and assess its simplicity and the balance of simplicity with technicality. As trailer composers, I have to say, we're all pretty good at writing simple stuff. because most of the things people want from trailer music, it's not intricacy or, technical prowess. It's impact and emotion. And you can achieve both of those things with very, very little. And that kind of goes in when you work with all these musicians. Don't think that you need to overcomplicate it. The brass lines I gave for my part, some of the most effective ones were when all of them were playing essentially in unison. Okay, octaves, but, it's like the bum, 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 bum. And it was just like, that's the business. It sounded fantastic. So it's about knowing when to use the simplicity and when to allow yourself to show a little bit more colour, as it were. Which brings me on to number 5. It's almost like I thought this out, by the way. This is probably the most well thought out podcast I've ever done. And I'm including the one that was like, episode 3, where I was like, top 5 mistakes trailer composers make, and I only put 4 in the episode. I was just checking that you guys paid attention to the details. Not. Anyway, brass. This is my point 5. Brass. Allowing fuller harmonies. Now, this ties in beautifully because there is a time and a place for unison, and there is a time and a place for fuller harmonies. Say we're in the kind of like the full stretch of Act 3. You have to think about what your parts are doing. I mean, your brass parts, by the way. Is it a top line that your horns are taking? Is it the chordal harmonies that your horns and bones are taking? You've got to have a think about what you're doing. And the temptation for me is always to hammer the bass note and hammer the melody. Often forgetting to add a little bit of colour in the middle. I'm very good at doing that with strings. I kind of allow myself to be lush with string writing, allow myself 4 or 5 part harmonies, or 4-part harmony with a counter melody. Depends how you look at it. But with brass, I often hold back and restrain myself. But in the session, I was hearing some of the other composers' tracks. So here do we have Kieran Birch, Jamie Stevens, Van Ghost, another composer who I've not met before. He wasn't there at the session, Andre something. And that sometimes they utilise the brass section in such a full and beautiful way that I sat and thought, damn it, I should really have explored that a little bit more. So if we take my big unison brass line as an example, that was perfect for me. That was exactly what it needed to do. But later on in the track, when the brass weren't necessarily playing that kind of repeated motif, I could have allowed to add more colour in the brass. So I'm kind of saying to myself, look, let me write the brass like I write the strings. Allow lusher harmonies to come out. And, you do have to be careful because the tendency is to stack everything in the bottom end. But actually, horns can do so much in their mid to high registers. So, yeah, it's a case of letting the brass, letting the brass take fuller harmonies and letting yourself write it simply. So perhaps it is just a 3-part harmony. If we're going full on jazz, maybe it's just the 3rd and the 7th. I don't know, depending on what style you're writing in, of course. But so this kind of leads me into point number 6. So I've done quite a few sessions now where I've been either producer, orchestrator, or composer, all 3. And this session at Abbey Road was amazing for the simple fact that Vic and the team at Elephant paid for the in-house orchestration team. And this was lovely for me because normally I'd be reading through the score, checking everything was done right, but we had an orchestrator in the room with us, in the booth, who was listening back to what the strings and brass were playing and feeding back notes to the conductor, who was also an orchestrator. And what they had done, we had sent them our Logic sessions, or our DAW sessions, Logic in my case. We'd sent them our DAW sessions, and they had orchestrated the parts appropriately. Some of it was obviously simple, i.e. like that brass line. They're all doing exactly what it says on the tin. But other times, they took things that we had done and applied their orchestration knowledge to what we had written. To the point where there was a line they were playing in my brass, and the conductor said, "Hey, let's put the trumpet on the top line." And, normally when I'm working in Logic with brass, I stray away from the trumpets, except for the sort of top line at the very back of the third act, because of the kind of natural, heroic, military connotations. But having the trumpet player in that session, at that time, playing the top line of the brass, it just absolutely tore through the mix. And not so it was like, oh, that's a trumpet, but just like, oh, that brass has so much bite to it. It was fantastic. These orchestrators brought their knowledge to the table and improved what I had done and checked what I had done. And it was fantastic. It was really nice for me because I was able to sit back and be like, well, this is great. I don't have to do anything. I've had other sessions where I'm sat in that position talking to the conductor, feeding back on what's orchestrated and what's written, and but in those instances it was more stressful. But this one was great. It was so relaxing. I could just sit and enjoy it, knowing that these people had done such a fantastic job and in some cases improved my own work. And it was kind of like, that when I started having Toby Mason mix my work. And this, that was a blessing and a curse. The curse being that I then sat back and stopped paying attention to detail as much. But the blessing, obviously, that I stopped worrying about it so much. And the blessing here was that, oh, wow, this whole recording process was just a piece of cake and super fun and super relaxing. We could all just chill out knowing that the conductor was feeding back on the orchestration. The orchestrator was feeding back on the orchestration. It was just fantastic. The process was absolutely seamless. And they had done a lot of the things I mentioned in my previous 5 points. They had accentuated the expression in the longs, the strings I'm talking about here. They helped improve the playability of the short string lines. They had orchestrated interesting textures in some of the cues. They had allowed the simplicity of our writing to sound full and beautiful. And they just had complete control of the session. It was absolutely fantastic. I was just blown away with how easy everything was. And I haven't heard the full mixes. In fact, the engineer we had, most of the time, just had the strings or the brass playing through, so we couldn't hear it in context. And occasionally he would tease in the full mix, and it'd be like, "Oh my God, this sounds amazing." It's kind of like, I know what an orchestra sounds like, and I know how good it is, but you just can't beat that excitement of hearing an orchestra play your work and then hearing it together, and it just becoming this thing of, it's not just you sat in a room, it's this whole process. So yeah, it really was fantastic, obviously. And then you just sort of add the cherry on the top that this was Abbey Road, and it becomes this kind of like, oh, yep, bucket list, tick, record at Abbey Road. In fact, the engineer was saying that quite often they'll have work that's people coming in for their 50th or 60th, recording their bands as part, they've been saving up for one of their big birthdays to come and record at Abbey Road. And I get it, it's cool. Yeah, I recorded my band's EP at Abbey Road, yeah. There's prestige to it. And Abbey Road knows that. So how can this translate to me helping you and helping myself? It's those 5 and or 6 points, because the 6 point kind of isn't something you can necessarily action if you don't have the budget, you know. But what you can action is your grasp of orchestration. So I have a grasp of orchestration, hence being able to have orchestrated my own parts previously and been the working with the conductor in the session, having mocked up the scores in Sibelius for the orchestra. You know, and all of this I taught myself. I learned theory. I learned how to read scores. I would sit and listen to classical music whilst reading the scores. This was all stuff I taught myself. Working with the orchestrator for a couple of years in Brighton when I was at uni, that was very much like him guiding my learning. So why don't you check out Shostakovich for orchestration, you know, or, you know, why don't you check out, Ravel, you know, for orchestration, and helping me understand the process. And had I told myself then that those skills I was teaching myself on my own in my room, listening to, what was the stuff? Grieg was my favourite. Grieg still is one of my favourites, actually. Listening to Edvard Grieg. The stuff you're doing now, Richie, because that's what I call myself. Hey, Richie. The stuff you're doing now, dude, is going to enable you to record with orchestras later on. And one day you'll be in Abbey Road recording, and you won't even have to do this stuff. It's just lovely. And it's really nice because being able to read music, I was able to open up the score to another composer's work and understand what was happening. It's not necessary. You don't have to do it. It is a skill that takes time and effort. So yeah, it was wonderful. So my advice to you, if you want to get to this point, is just write bloody good music. It's really obvious, isn't it? It's just really obvious, because the better quality music you write, the more chance you'll have where a library will then say, let's go record this. And that's one of those annoying catch-22s, isn't it? How do I know I'm writing good music? Because it floats your boat. How do I write music that is amazing and beautiful and smashes it and unique and all these things that everyone wants, organic and human and huge, you know, bigger than 700 people playing at the same time? Just continual work. I still have to work on everything. I still have to work on my production. I still have to buy new libraries. I still have to work on my composition. I still have to practice my musical knowledge, you know, and enhance my musical knowledge. It's not like you get to a point where you're like, tick, done. Now I know it. It's not like in The Matrix when he unplugs and says, now I know Kung Fu. That would be really cool. But it's not like that because, you know, frankly, I haven't read a score for a while, so it took me like a couple of minutes to kind of re-engage my brain, you know, wait a second, this is the which clef we do. But then it came back. So you kind of have to assess and ask yourself, what is it that's important to me? Some of you might not want to work with orchestras. Some of you might just want to make absolutely hard-hitting sound design, you know? But for me, this is something I love. Recording with real players and hearing your music translated in the flesh. It's absolutely beautiful and stunning. So, yeah, those were my takeaways. And I thought it was quite fun of me. I thought it was quite fun for me to record my like pre-Abbey Road chat and then do a couple of little iPhone recordings when I was in the room, just so that we'd get more of a kind of a holistic thing, the whole experience for you. Because I did a video years ago after recording in Budapest, where it was just like, I think it was my first vlog. I was absolutely terrified, where I just kind of sat in front of my computer with my a webcam talking about my experience, I probably got all-time high views of about 20 or 30. So those 20 or 30 people got some quality material. But anyway, I thought this would be a lot more relaxing. I did actually bring my camera to record it as a vlog when I was there, but do you know what? It's just the problem is I get very excited by lots of things, Let's make this into a movie. Let's make this into a course. Let's make this into a podcast. Let's make this into a blog. Make it into the book. And I'm like, okay, calm down. Like, let's just do the podcast, because at least they're going to listen through to the whole thing. And it's going to take far less of your time. So I hope you guys enjoyed this. You are absolute legends for taking your time to listen to me rambling around in the woods again. In fact, I've missed it, talking in the woods. And talking to you, ultimately. It does make it feel a lot nicer. I have done recordings where I've recorded in my study, talking into the mic at the computer. It feels really weird. Whereas this feels like I'm talking to my buddy on the phone. But my buddy is mute and doesn't ever say anything back to me. But you're just such a good listener. Right, guys, I'm going to end on that because I don't think I'm going to beat that one. And I'll speak to you in the next episode.